And we are live. This is Dark Journalist. Oh, what a fantastic crowd we have out there and the ideas from already. Of course, tonight I am joined by the lovely Olivia.
Hi, everybody.
And Olivia, I was dreaming when I wrote this. Forgive me if it goes astray, but I could have sworn this morning when I woke up it was Judgment Day.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason for that is that the plan to release the JFK files has now arrived at the White House, which many thought would never actually happen. Now, we know this thing had been scheduled out for 15 days by executive order. And now they have something there, which is, they have the actual plan, which means Trump can implement this. And he's been moving very quickly on things. I've put a lot into these files, not because I think that there's a revelation in there that shows you directly that the CIA and ex-protect groups were involved in the assassination of President Kennedy. But there are things in those records that lead and support the entire notion of the aerospace action to eliminate President Kennedy in 1963. That's the historical impact, and it may get spun a number of different ways, but when we see those records, we're going to be able to parlay that information, as a matter of fact. Of course, it's very interesting when you get around these things, just like when you get around the UFO file and all of the CIA disinformation agents that have been pouring onto these podcasts and news shows and pretending to be authorities on transparency and stuff when they're the ones who've been covering it up for 8 decades now. I mean, this is really quite the role reversal. And it's very important for them to astroturf the entire thing and make it appear that they're the heroes of transparency, because they plan to roll out a UFO threat event. And I'm going to show you tonight how that relates directly to our theme tonight, which is the FBI and the UFO file. Well, the history of the FBI with the UFO file goes very, very deep indeed. And their role in the JFK assassination, of course, through the figure of J. Edgar Hoover, can't be missed, along with their obfuscation of evidence in Dealey Plaza. But how does that relate to that 61-year arc of history that we find ourselves in? Well, you're going to find the latest revelation, which came up this week, which shocked even me, was that the FBI revealed they had a UFO working group inside the FBI currently. And what's interesting is this realization came about because they thought they were going to get thrown out by Trump because of their connections with January 6th shenanigans. So this was a life raft of survival that they were looking for. And this story goes deep, and I'm going to get deep, deep into it tonight in our special report, which is Dark Journalist FBI and the UFO file secret revealed. We're going to go about 90 minutes with you here on this special report given to you on a Saturday. And, it's great to have so many people out there on this. Just wait, because although I was aware the FBI groups were working on the UFO file, for them to talk about it is exceptional. I'm going to show you why that's a total breach of protocol, suggesting a kind of desperation from this group inside the FBI, hanging on to their piece of the UFO file. And I'm also going to show you where there's a backdoor engineering going on with some of the Elon Musk moves around the Trump administration, which is an attempt to hoard that UFO file out of presidential control and put it under the SpaceX defense contractor agency. Now, I'll tell you what's interesting about this, which is Musk himself, when he goes on all these shows, he always blows away the idea of UFOs and aliens and all that. And there's good reason for that. He's told what to do, and DARPA is in charge of him in relation to that particular piece of information. In fact, it's well known among informed people and intelligence officials that SpaceX has the largest private collection of UFO images and photos of any corporation in the world because of their incredible access and satellite access for governments around the world. So this goes deep, and it's not for the faint of heart with the Musk thing, because a lot of people appreciate the transparency of X and things of this nature, that whole Twitter lifting it from one thing to another. But that may have been a stepping stone into this position. And there are very good, reasonable arguments suggesting that what's happening there with Musk and Doge is literally a data grab that could be very dangerous for when he does the X Everything app. Of course, on this show, we warned you from the very start. We started off, of course, it's the X-Steganography series, that the X-Steganography that they've been using relates to a kind of secret technology that's been developed in the background related, on one hand, to the UFO file, and on the other hand, to this mystery school style activity. And this gets us into the Tesla technology. And it's very interesting. When you get into X technology, it acts very much like, this effect that comes off of it is very much like what happens when a UFO encounter occurs. All the reality distortion physics kick in, and you have this apotheum effect. And I'm going to get into how that works. One of the things I left everyone hanging on last week was this very unusual apotheum effect that took place when the Boston Globe tried to go and photograph Betty and Barney Hill, the original UFO abductees. And I'm going to show you here in just momentarily the very unusual things that happened to the photographs that the photographer took that he was mystified by and said had never happened to him in 22 years of being a photographer. They had to go back a number of times to get the right pictures for the Betty and Barney Hill thing. So whatever took place in that case, the weird energy was still dancing off of them and screwing up the photographs. Quite remarkable. I also have a very interesting couple of things that are going on when you're looking at some of the stuff that's being pushed out by Elizondo and Mellon at this point. There's some pushback now that we're seeing, thank God, because it's been a real CIA march in this direction of false UFO threat disclosure. So we need to really, put this in perspective and take things to a totally different place. And I'm going to show you where that pushback happened. It was quite interesting. But they're starting to catch on. They're starting to catch on that Lion Lou and his brigade there, backed by DOD billionaire Mellon, are trying to create a false UFO file threat. And when their threat activity got exposed by this channel, which caught on through others because of the Ideas Room predominantly, because we know Google likes to sanction the show off very hardcore with censorship. But when that got out, they had to kind of change their tune. And now you notice they're really doing this psionic thing. Mm-hmm. And it's funny because someone was like, well, psionic, they were like, they've used that word before. What's the big deal? No, it's not that the word itself has any problems. It's that this is the false appropriation of terms in order to spin the UFO file piece for Elizondo and these other people in different directions. And so when the threat thing didn't work so well, people are starting to catch on to that. Now they're like, oh, Lou's a remote viewer, don't you know? Mm-hmm. I'm going to tell you something about this guy. His main talent before coming forward here was dumping fluids down terrorists' throat and doing a waterboarding, which is a torture activity. And, it was granted under the Bush administration. They pulled that back, but apparently it was still going on. And guys like Lou, that's their main talent, counterintelligence and interrogation. All right. So the idea of this guy, he just went on some show pretending to know Native American symbols showing up on UFOs and all that. Nobody's buying it who has a brain or has any background in this. The people who are buying it are just frontline, podcasters who don't have any idea what the UFO file is all about. And that's okay, too, but they need to step it up because otherwise the steamrolling of the Central Intelligence Agency, their funding, especially the Age of Disclosure video, which has Elizondo's agent as the producer and director, is funded by Mellon and his minions. This is bad. This whole move is bad. And, of course, these people can do whatever they want, but it needs to be called out. It has nothing to do with the UFO file or genuine UFO research, and we got to really step it up on pointing that out respectfully and in a gentleman's debate type forum. And those people, of course, whenever I've engaged with them, they've been anything but gentlemen. But now what they're doing is very interesting because I think I mentioned this last week where they have Elizondo going after these different and sometimes very small Twitter accounts who are calling him out and saying, aha, you know, that's defamation. And here's this weirdo lawyer who's going to do something about it. Well, it's not defamation. He's a public figure. He's lied in public multiple times. And if anyone needs that information, I'm happy to provide it with them. How about when he said a chandelier was a multifaceted mothership, and that the crew of the group that had taken the picture had talked with him and he had debriefed them when it turned out to be the reflection of a picture, and was completely debunked and came from some Facebook group. All right. So that's the kind of intel that this guy's putting out there. It's really low level intel, and they think they can get away with it. And but I do think it's dangerous that one of the things that they've adopted is to take some of the rhetoric from this show and put it in the mouth of Elizondo. So I'm looking into the best way to call this information out. I think that fundamentally what you're looking at is a counterintelligence hijacking of the congressional inquiries, counterintelligence hijacking of entertainment forums and all the rest of it by this CIA UFO file group. And remember, that's the false disclosure. It has nothing to do with the actual UFO file, which does exist and we need to get to the bottom of. But this other thing is the exact opposite. And it's funny because you have these people like Burchett and Annapalooza Luna and all that, and they're featured in the Chris Mellon documentary, which has Elizondo's agent as the age of disclosure. This guy Farah, he's Lou's agent, and he's putting out these other whistleblower books now. It's going to be a little cottage industry, and the CIA likes to do this with the disinformation to actually make it profitable as we go. But they're up there, and you have people like Luna saying you need to watch this, and now people like Luna, who's Annapalooza Luna, she's a she's a Florida congresswoman, and she said some good things before. I'm sure she wants some kind of disclosure, but she's getting taken in by a number of these people. This is part of the problem, and we're getting into that tonight. But one of the things I want to point out that she's doing is she's dangling this thing like, everyone, next week I'm going to drop some intel that'll change the world and all this stuff. That's kind of podcast marketing type stuff, and it's a little undignified for a congresswoman. I'll put it to you that. So the whole thing is becoming a CIA circus because that's how they operate. And it's, I think the other one was Nancy Mace, who was doing these tweets and saying, come at me, bro. If you want to get to the truth on UFOs, look, be intelligent. You have incredibly good, solid information to deal with this and to get to the bottom of it. And this other stuff, and working with CIA people and, throwing in little slogans and things like that, it has nothing to do with what we need, which is a very robust, potent action to get real disclosure around the UFO file. So we're going to do that. And I'm going to show you some pretty wild things that came up in the last week. The weeks have been pretty crazy with some of this. The year has just started off with a bang. It's great to have so many of you here. This is the FBI and the UFO file secret revealed special report. And like I said, we're going to go till about 10 o'clock with you here tonight. And in the second half, or the last half hour actually of the show, we're going to be taking your questions. So I want to remind you now you can ask them. And Miss Olivia is putting those together. Miss Olivia, what do you got out there?
Kurt Metzger's in the chat.
Yeah, Kurt. Mr. Kurt.
Great to see you.
Kurt did an incredible, he's done a lot of incredible things, but he did an incredible episode on Joe Rogan, I think just a couple of weeks ago or last week. And they touched on so many interesting things. It was like, this was really moving. And I vote for Kurt on Rogan far more than Elizondo or any of those guys who are just whitewashing the entire issue. So let's make sure we get that message through, because we need the real thing. And, unfortunately, the disaster. It's interesting when you get into the intel things, because one of the things I studied, this goes back a long time now, maybe almost 15 years ago, was that interface of marketing, media, and the Central Intelligence Agency. And it's very well known. And when I was starting out, you'd hear this a lot, that if you didn't have some kind of relationship with the Central Intelligence Agency as a journalist, that it was a make or break thing, because they were the ones who had all of these connections in foreign countries, so you couldn't get any of those stories. So if you were going to work for, the New York Times or the Nation or any of those, you'd need to have a relationship with the CIA. So that whole thing, and their control over what the media has to say, ballooned out, has gone on since their inception in 1947. But by the time they got exposed with certain things in the 1970s, Church Committee, starting to come out, oh, wait, you control on your payroll 400 journalists? Who are they? There was a dip in all that awareness for a long, long time. And it really wasn't until the past sort of decade or so it started to come back around. Oh, they control the whole thing. So I think it's very important when you're talking about the UFO file in particular to have a zero CIA policy, complete UFO zero. There's no reason for CIA counterintelligence people to be in that mix because they're born liars and they're under orders. And, I had explained to someone, I won't reveal their name, but they are a journalist. And I had to explain to them how it was a woman, and she was saying to me how Lou Elizondo had done all this stuff by being a whistleblower and had quit the military and the intelligence community in order to do it. No. He never quit anything. He never quit. Do you understand? Look at the track here. He didn't quit. He never stopped working for the government. That was all a sham for a New York Times article, and it started off all this nonsense. Disgruntled employee wants truth about UFOs, and they took pictures of him. They used this New York Times photographer to take pictures of him in this sad pose about being rejected because his boss wouldn't give the public disclosure. So when I went back, I found through different channels that he was working for the government the whole time. He never got off the government gravy train. And then finally, I think it was The Intercept that pressed him on this, like 3 years after he came out. And they were like, do you work for the government? This is the question that people like George Knapp and Dolan and all those people fell on their face over. They never asked him anything tough. They gave him every softball in the world, thinking that they were going to be in on CIA disclosure. And he said, yeah, I do work for the government, but it's not what you think. Well, there you have it. And now we find out that he's got all kinds of jobs with the government. And so that's the nature of this guy and the way that they've run him through. All of these people are under an umbrella of Mellon's influence. And so we've got into that. If you don't examine that from a reporter's standpoint and break open those connections as we've done in this program, you'll never get all these fluffy things with people sitting around doing podcasts on UFOs with CIA people. That doesn't get anybody or the subject anywhere. That actually reverses the thing way, way back. And unfortunately, there's a naivete. Even, people like Tucker or other people who might do a good job in general, when it gets around the UFO thing, they don't have the information, and that's a big problem. So we'll see if we can remedy that. Mm-hmm. Yes. What do you got there?
Kyle the White says, what does DJ have to say specifically about Lou on the Sean Ryan show? Seems to be the preferred platform to roll out the limited hangout.
Yeah, I don't think it's the fault of people like Sean Ryan. I think that they just don't have enough details, and they think, oh, I've got a guy here who ran a UFO program, but he didn't. And there was one guy who thought he was asking tough questions, but they're easy questions. So they're like, oh, there was a letter where Harry Reid endorsed you, and everyone says it's fake. Well, I never said it was fake. Harry Reid was one of the worst senators, Senate Majority Leader, and the level of corruption in his state of Nevada, forget it. He was the guy who oversaw secrecy at Area 51. His endorsement of Elizondo is nothing to take to, that's not something that would go in terms of establishing credibility at all. You have to remember that Mellon himself is the mayor of Area 51. He's the guy who went in there. The other thing I want to point out about these people is, as of 2016, they were all denying heavily the UFO file in public. I have their statements. So the fact that they flipped means somebody knew or somebody told them in the background, this is going to be some major, major money train coming in. We're going to release some things about the UFO file. You guys cook it up. We need a story. We need some kind of a story. And what they've been doing is going in there and reinventing things that, people just caught Lou ripping off Carl Sagan, plagiarizing Carl Sagan. He's plagiarized this show. He just says things to make him look like he has some grasp on the thing, like, oh, I'm looking very hard into those symbols of the Native Americans in relation to the symbols we see on UFOs. Hello, John Keel, 1967. That's not, so that's part of what they're doing. It's the co-opting aspect. But yeah, I'm glad you asked that, because I have a couple of things in relation to that. First, I want to jump in on this. Well, actually, I will finish off this little bit about the CIA. Here's one thing I found really funny. So if you do a search for dark journalist in YouTube, you get John Ramirez, one of the CIA abductee guys who's running part of the UFO thread. Now, isn't that interesting? That's the cream of the jest, because, they're, of course, selecting the ads. So you search for dark journalist, and the first thing you get is big CIA man. This is how they're working it. And, it's an interesting approach, the level of control that they have. And yet, the mere fact that we're here and broadcasting this, even if it's a lone outpost challenging them, it sends ripples. It sends gigantic ripples, and it could collapse what they're doing. There was talk about how, Don Trump Jr. was having Elizondo on his podcast and talking UFOs and all this stuff, and that there were hints that, he was going to be the UFO czar. First of all, the UAP czar, pardon me. First of all, if you use UAP anything, it's a complete abrogation of the actual issue. One, because the CIA always changes names for things to change the detail of the thing itself. Two, a czar is a stupid idea. Have a commission and have it be citizen-based with maybe one politician involved who's accountable to those citizens. This other idea of having a CIA counterintelligence agent do it is the stupidest thing. As a matter of fact, if they get into this deeply and they get their hands around the UFO file, you'll find yourself in a worse situation than you would even with the military-industrial complex piece blocking all this out. So the Central Intelligence Agency is obfuscated for 80 years on this. Why would you give them a CIA person to do more of that officially? So no, that would be a terrible thing, and hopefully we put enough of that across. I wanted to point out a few odd things, and it has to do with, I'm not done with the drones. The drones are a big problem. And when they came heavily into focus here really in December, there were a number of very interesting things that came out. One of them were former FBI officials who were really befuddled, supposedly, by what was happening. Former FBI official issues chilling warning on U.S. airspace after mysterious drones spotted in New Jersey. Remember that? FBI leader says it's concerning how little his agency knows about mysterious drones seen over New Jersey. The FBI was out there and they were talking kind of nervous, like this was something outside their control. They were not saying these things don't exist. They were not saying, as the independent media got around to, they're misidentifications, which is proven to be totally false. They were not misidentifications. They had thousands of drones that were swarming New Jersey and other places like Atlanta, and we still see it happening, as a matter of fact. All right, one of the guys who's been on the front line of that, actually, I've got one more. It is, I'm going to get his name here, Chuck DeVore. This is a retired Army colonel, and he says mystery drones over U.S. military base had to be from nation-state actors. This was a very interesting little piece of information that got missed. And I'm going to show you, I'm actually going to play the audio here of what he had to say. I'll cue this up. And Miss Olivia, while I do that, what do you got?
Foober Fighter says drones are a multifaceted element of asymmetrical warfare.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. You know, I don't want to be the guy who's just calling everybody out all the time, but the response on the UFO file groups and the independent media when it came to the drones was absolutely absurd. And the constant beating on of like, oh, you know, people are hysterical. Those are just planes. No, people understand what planes are versus drones. These were SUV style drones. You see those very often before December? I don't think so, except at U.S. military bases. So this is a Northcom exercise connected directly with the continuity of government group. We pointed it out. We've done the reports, but we continue to keep our eye on that. And the fact is, the more I get around the modern UFO push through the UAP people, I'm finding them very, very closely associated with that COG program. Here's what retired military man DeVore had to say. Very interesting little piece that was missed here. Listen to this from his interview on Fox News.
And it gets even worse. Some of the FBI agents that have been assigned to look into this have reported drones flying over their homes as if to say, hey, we know where you are. And so I really think that what this does is it boils down to an administration that doesn't take these threats seriously.
Now, you might remember a little thing that took place with the people who were suffering from Havana syndrome in Cuba, who were agents when we reestablished our embassy there. And they got thrown into this incredible situation. And what happened was that when they left, they suffered from acoustic concussions, all these very unusual effects, including microwave damage and things of this nature. Something or someone was using a very high-intensity energy weapon to damage these people. But here was the key thing that I noticed and did some reporting on at the time, which is that when those agents would leave, the symptoms and the syndrome would follow them home. So there they were in Havana, Cuba. They leave, they come back to New York or D.C., and the thing is still happening. So somehow, whatever kind of directed energy weapon is being used against them follows them around. Now, when you have the drones over the FBI agents who are investigating them hanging out over their homes, and as DeVore said, basically saying, I know where you live, that's a different level of warfare. And it's somebody demonstrating their ability to do these things with impunity. That's very, very dangerous. And it took place heavily in December and into January, just before President Trump was in office, to the point where President Trump's motorcade had to start adopting anti-drone missile bases on the top of his limos. So those missile silos there, not to be messed with. I will say this also in relation to Trump. They were intentionally placed over Bedminster, and he didn't go there while the drone thing was happening. So he was aware. By the time they got in and investigated, the Trump administration put out a whitewash statement about it. I'm guessing they had to. But there's no way that that was just, some professional companies and hobbyists, So we have a very unusual thing there. I think that this exchange that was going on with DeVore and Fox is going to pay off a little more as this episode goes along. And that is why tonight we're doing the FBI and the UFO file secret revealed. This is a special report. And like I said, we're going to go about another hour with you. And in about a half hour, we're going to switch to questions. And we have the lovely Miss Olivia doing questions. What do you got out there?
Switching gears for a minute, Lucky Pirate says, morning all. DJ, what's up with the 7.6 EQ in the Caribbean, Atlantis rising?
Oh, it's terrible. Yeah. Well, all those people on those coastlines are worried about huge tsunami action. But my God, that kind of an earthquake in that region, forget it, So hopefully everyone's safe. One of the things that does happen as a result of major hurricanes and tsunamis in that area is it does move things around, and you will find satellites taking pictures of things can find older structures especially directly there in the Bahamas, which is a major focal point of this geopolitical war in the hot zone. But just before we started, that news came in, and wow, that's incredible. You don't hear about eights at all.
Right. And astrologically, Pam Gregory, for example, keeps harping on about land rising, Atlantis, Lemuria. The evidence is coming. It's in the astrology.
Let me say this, which is that for the past 3 years, we've put land rising in the center of our State of the Union reports, right? That's something we did. Maybe other people are doing it now. And it's very important that it be there because land rising is a key tenement of the piece that goes on in the mystery schools, particularly in the Casey work, who is constantly referring to the fact that when these changes are occurring, you have massive land rising off the East Coast there, close to Bimini. So when that rises up, if it's in international waters, it's kind of this unknown territory. So, it's outside of international claims. And so, this is the nature of the problem. All right. A little bit about Jared Moskowitz. Congressman Moskowitz, he's out there really pushing for disclosure. And what I've done is I've put together a individual dossiers on each one of these Congress people pushing for it, just to find out where they're coming from, who their influences are, and why they're so fascinated all of a sudden with the UFO topic, which I can tell you they never talked about previously. Somebody is whispering in the background, aha, UAP. All right, Moskowitz. In 2019, Jared Moskowitz was appointed by Governor DeSantis to be Florida's Director of Emergency Management. As director, he was responsible for disaster recovery efforts. He took over FEMA. Having worked on the front lines when disaster hit, Jared understands the importance of readiness, cutting through red tape. That's why, as a member of Congress, he became one of the first pieces of legislation that he introduced would establish the Federal Management Agency, FEMA, as a cabinet-level agency. Through this change, the American people no longer have to wait on government. Well, that's the siren song sideshow of it. But this Democrat, it's very interesting because he's waving all these flags for UAP stuff, and here's his FEMA COG connection, emergency management. If they can get these emergency management people talking UFOs on one hand and then being experts on the emergency side on the other, you can see where that story goes. Sky emergency, you got emergency powers through the continuity of government people. So you have to see how these people are lining up. They are not heroes of disclosure. They're paid agents of different types of individual groups, or at least they are, shall we say, influenced by the type of support that they're getting in the background. Somebody is whispering, this breakaway technology is coming out. You got to get on there. You have to talk about this. And so it might not be any particular congressperson, or senator, but you can see that group somehow in Congress and the Senate, and they're always getting CIA people right up there. Back then, when we had this thing going on in November, right after the election, UAPs are real. Congress pushes quest for transparency on UFOs. All the people there were not engaged with that or were ill-informed. So like Schellenberger, the things that he said, ridiculous. Remember the whole thing about Immaculate Constellation? You never heard anything about that again. Well, total dud. Almost as bad, but not quite as bad as the egg, the loving egg. Mm-hmm. The guy who fell in love with the egg. Yeah, that's where you're going now with the CIA thing. They're going to throw all kinds of spaghetti against the wall. What I do see about this, though, is that when that whole trip was going on, we were getting false stories, and they were lowering the bar on all of this. And they had Elizondo testifying, and he gave all kinds of mushy answers. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. I do that, ma'am. I stand up for my family and take the slings and arrows, ma'am. I mean, this guy, you're a CIA counterintelligence agent. I wish you well with your counterintelligence career lying, but you're not bringing it into the UFO field. Sorry, you're being stopped, and we are smashing the UFO file threat op that you guys have operated. And I'll tell you, the fact that you are moving and morphing this exercise so much tells me that you have more problems than you realize. Okay. I'm going to read a little bit from this because it's going to come in handy later. UAPs are real. Congress pushes quest for transparency on UFOs. House Oversight Committee pushed its probe into UFOs and secrecy surrounding them in a hearing aimed at forcing more transparency from the government. The House Oversight Accountability Committee pushed to probe into UFOs. Now, it's interesting because the actual committee hearing was on UAPs, but we know they have to say UFO in order to get the right, if they want people to actually see it, because UAP is such a ridiculous, stupid term. In March, AARO released a report finding no evidence that the government was hiding evidence of alien spacecraft or technology, and said most cases of UFO sightings could be explained as optical illusions, airborne trash, or drones. So what you have here is an interesting dynamic because they've set up AARO as this UFO defense office. They're the ones who go through everything. But they need to debunk things over and over again. And then you can set up false heroes who are CIA people saying, we're defying that AARO. But neither agency is after the truth. Neither group. All right. That leads us to this one. Now, this came out this week, and I think will change the entire dynamic around the UFO file research around the FBI. That's how important I think this story is. This is from The Hill. And remember, The Hill owns News Nation. So we're talking about, overdrive, over the top, UFO, Russ Coldhart, like nonsense, eggs, CIA, clown show, disaster, disclosure, not the real thing. Agents sue FBI, DOJ amid fears of retaliation over work on January 6th cases. This is how it started. The January 6th case agents, the ones who were afraid of retaliation, are also somehow the UFO file group inside the FBI. It's the same people. FBI UFO group. The FBI and the Department of Justice are being sued by 16 current agents who say their review of those who worked on the cases of some 1,500 January 6 defenses is a preparation to retaliate against the agents. The agencies were hit with back-to-back lawsuits shortly after a noon deadline for the FBI to turn over the Department of Justice the responses of a 13-question survey about agents' work on those who stormed the Capitol on January 6, 2021. And they go into that whole bit. What's interesting is the people involved in all of this are people who are part of the UFO file working group inside the FBI who do not want to lose that access and are afraid because they colluded in the provocateur activity during the January 6th incident that they're going to get thrown out and lose all the things that they've been doing and attached to on this. I think that this crisscross is dramatic, and this story is going to ricochet heavily, and I mean heavily, in the middle of all this, because it is the UFO file in the FBI, a new group that was announced. And it's interesting enough that it's Ryan Graves who put the entire story on the map about this FBI UFO working group, or they call it the UAP working group. They have a real name that was, buried deep there in the woods. It's not called UAP working group, I can tell you that. But if we could get the name, we could get a lot more info about these people. But one thing that's interesting is they're part of the group that was setting up the January 6th piece. So when Trump retaliates against them and blows them away, they lose their UFO file access. That is the reason why that got brought up, and it could cause an entire earthquake, a tsunami of these things to take place. Now, One thing I do want to say about some of the, the amount of things that the Trump administration has been doing, they've done a lot in a very short period of time, and you can see the direction of how things are going to go. My only worry with the Trump administration is that, in general, the public put them back in power to secure the border, to improve the economy, to return the government to sanity in terms of spending and, not having 73 genders and men and women's sports and things like that. And following the Constitution and, really to be the opposite of this Biden regime. Those are the things that they need to be talking about, America first and all the rest. Unfortunately, what's crept in, and I think part of this is Marco Rubio influence, but the thing that came up about taking over Gaza, the Gaza Strip, and remaking it after war into some kind of lovely housing development or something. The United States can't go near a war zone like that. And you'd find yourself in Middle East, Vietnam, and that's a terrible idea. And then when they tried to really, the reporters and stuff press the Trump administration, they did not have good answers on this. And Hegseth was like, well, we're a long way off from boots on the ground. No, Hegseth, we're not a long way off. We're never off. We're not putting boots on the ground in the Middle East. It's a terrible idea. And the problems that have existed there in that strip and all the rest, if you need to be innovative in terms of producing solutions and things like that, fine. But come on, you're not going to put America in there or American soldiers in there, to die by terrorist bombs. It's very weird because there are strange parallels that have been taking place with the Reagan administration when they came in and the Trump administration when they're coming in. Right when Reagan got in, there was a massive thing about the air traffic controllers and how that union defied him, so he fired them and replaced them really quickly. Interestingly enough, one of the things with Alexander Haig as Secretary of State in that era, early 1980s, one of the biggest foreign policy mistakes that the United States made was to put troops in Beirut. And they got blown up by terrorist truck bombs, and we lost over 200 soldiers. That's what happens over there. And no guarantees by BB or anything like that is going to change that. So completely take that, Americans did not vote for that, completely take that off the agenda. And if that's a Rubio piece, then get rid of it because it's a disaster. So many other things that are being suggested are so positive that it really stands out. So it's somebody's really poor judgment on the foreign policy angle. Maybe get better foreign policy advisors would be my suggestion there. There's my free advice to the Trump administration on that one. All right, one of the great things, of course, that Trump is doing, the decades-long wait for the release of the government's secret files on the assassination of President Kennedy is nearing an end. JFK assassination files one step closer to possible public release. This came out 4 hours ago from ABC News. The decades-long wait for the release of the government information on the assassination of President John F. Kennedy could be nearing an end. And in accordance with the president's executive order, the office of the ODNI, Office of Defense, submitted its plan to the White House, a spokesperson for the office said in a Friday afternoon statement to ABC News. Now, here's the thing. They have the plan, which is a very, very important move at this point. Now it's being reported and it's on time. So this could be quite an earthquake in terms of shaking up that entire deep state structure. There's no question that they can't sit on that lie. So the question is, how are they going to spin themselves out of it? I think this could be a major move that has major implications and gets us right, believe it or not, into the heart of the UFO file. Now, here's another piece which relates to the UFO file, but it's not so obvious. But I'm going to show you how. And this, again, we have to sort of be playing with Elon Musk on this, which is unfortunate. Trump wants America's own Iron Dome. Elon Musk can make it happen. No, 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 no. We don't need Elon Musk to make it. But this goes back to the Star Wars Strategic Defense Initiative that President Reagan put together in 1983 using some of the best scientists. The idea was a missile shield so that the Cold War really would have no purpose, because if we all were covered, then there'd be no reason to set off nuclear bombs. But now Trump bringing it back. Remember one of the things that was said about SDI, which is that it was actually a UFO defense grid. Now, it's interesting because there are a number of stories that are entirely credible, suggesting the intel they were showing to Reagan was making him panic because of what he was seeing. Now, the reasons for the things that he was seeing, that is large-scale UFOs hanging out in space in near-Earth orbit, got him into this Star Wars thing. And that's why you got him in that secret conversation in Reykjavik with Gorbachev saying, you know what, if they attack, then will you be with us? Will you fight the UFOs with us? And Gorbachev, of course, who revealed this publicly, it's on the record, Gorbachev said yes, and he said Reagan was 100% serious. But this inclusion of Musk is a problem, and Musk should be nowhere near any of this. No way. Now, recently, and I mean, this came out this morning, GOP senators backed Trump's space-based Iron Dome plan with $19.5 billion bill. These guys got behind it and jumped to it. So part of this exercise, again, under the auspices of a missile shield, as Star Wars was under Reagan, is really something connected directly with the UFO file, and has two-way possibilities in terms of this. The fact that Trump is going for it is one thing, and there may be some reasons for him doing this, but you cannot have Musk involved, because Musk already, when you read the polling data and all the rest of it, Musk is not doing Trump any favors. And you could accomplish a number of the things that you're doing with Musk, with Doge and all that, which you have to be careful with what they're doing with Doge also, because, a lot of it's low-hanging fruit. Every year, for example, Rand Paul puts out the entire same report of government waste, showing things like, giving condoms to Hamas and things of this nature. He's been the expert at that. And but they haven't let him in as part of Doge, which is odd. And he, seems to approve of it and everything else. They need, senatorial level representation in there, instead of, these people that are loyal to Musk. And there's been lots of, I think, very legitimate objections raised to the amount of information that Musk is getting his hands on through Treasury. And so this could boomerang, instead of being the good thing that Trump wants to, go through these agencies one at a time and get rid of this waste. It could boomerang, and it could be too much power in the hands of Musk, who may misuse it. We don't need Musk for any of this stuff. You could do Doge with Rand Paul and a super tech team doing the same thing. If you want to use Musk as an advisor, it's good. It seems to me the more he's keeping close to the presidency, the more overshadowing of Trump's agenda he's doing, and he's filling in a role for himself. So my advice would be backpedal on Musk and keep going with the agenda, because the agenda is good, but Musk is not the right person for it by a long shot. And I think with him running 6 companies and being a defense contractor, it's too much power to put in somebody's hand. But for sure, don't put him anywhere near a Star Wars type missile defense program. That would be a disaster. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. Whew, FBI and the UFO file secret revealed. We've seen some secrets here tonight. We're going to go deeper on all of this. We're going to take your questions here in about 20 minutes before I go any further. Miss Olivia, what do you got?
Blazing River says, Trump seems smart enough to have someone he trusts watching Musk. Trump has learned to be quite paranoid.
Well, Trump's not a tech expert. So, it's a deficit of some kind in dealing with him. He did say that, if Musk was doing something which was more business oriented, that he would change things. So he's aware, but I don't, you see, there's a lot of problems. It was very interesting. I'll show you part of the problem. So you had Brett Weinstein on Joe Rogan the other day. And okay, so Brett, this guy, he's done a good podcast dealing with COVID and all kinds of things. But he also had to come to things late. Originally he was supportive of the government's position, and then he changed and was like, oh yeah. And so he's done some good things, but there's a naivete in there. So he's sitting around talking to Joe Rogan about this, and he says, oh yeah, and don't think that Elon Musk won't find the funding for the UFOs that's in there too, man. He's going to smash the whole thing open. Are you kidding me? First of all, Musk won't even admit the UFOs exist. 1. 2, DARPA has him completely under control because you can't operate up there without the Air Force and DARPA. So he's not going to do anything to, piss them off. What are you kidding? Are you that naive, Brett Weinstein? That doesn't make sense. You seem intelligent and everything else. So I think there's a problem here. People don't understand that a lot of the stuff that Musk is doing, even the positive stuff, is very opportunist. So we got to go in eyes wide open on things of that nature. And when it comes to the UFO file especially, are you kidding me? Elon Musk isn't going to find the funding. That's the pipeline for all the companies that he works with and for. There's no way he's going to give any of that information out. They have, as I mentioned at the top of the show, SpaceX has the largest private collection of UFOs, of videos and radar and everything else of any company. And he says that they don't exist. So no, he's completely into obfuscation, and he's not going to provide any UFO transparency. He's probably the last person on earth who would do it, except for John Brennan. That's probably, so come on, let's at least be real about it. And don't live in a weird fantasy land where this billionaire's doing all this stuff for you, and he's going to get you the UFO disclosure with all those CIA agents that are doing it. It's pathetic. So I don't know. I think I sort of want a course for all the independent media groups out there on the UFO file because they don't understand it. I've put this across before, which is my whole life I've been a student of deep state researchers, from Professor Peter Dale Scott, Jim Mars, and others. And they understood, like the real hardcore guys like Scott and, all of these other fantastic researchers. They understand the deep state and how it operates. They understand how the government and assassination works. They have the fundamental background and the levels. So what they don't have and what they don't include is the UFO file, which is why I've tried to merge that into my approach, because it's so crucial. Because the UFO file, the people who understand that there is a UFO file have a great advantage, because they can understand why all this geopolitical machinery flips out and goes into action. But the idea that, you can go into this without that deep state knowledge or background makes you a sucker for CIA counterintelligence people who will sucker punch you 24/7 because that's their job. They're just going to work, And so let's have this ripple out and be a better conversation, much better conversation. Those are counterintelligence agents, and they're never going to give Sean Ryan or Joe Rogan or any of those people the truth, even though people like Rogan or Ryan are looking for the truth. These people won't do it. Chris Mellon, are you kidding? Chris Mellon threw his 22-year-old son into a social media fray in order to deflect blame on himself for controlling UFO whistleblowers. You think that guy's going to come up with anything? He's looking forward to the next billionaires meeting with Caviar about how they can launch a UFO threat. So, we're going to have to be realistic if this whole thing is going to work. And trust me, I don't want to be a lone outpost on this thing. I want everybody to be right on the same level and doing the same thing. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist show. Whoo! There's been a lot going on. FBI and the UFO file secret revealed. I'm going to get into now a couple of classic FBI moves, but before I do that, Miss Olivia, what have you got?
Okay, I'm glad you're turning to me because I have some good
Yeah.
questions. Hang on one second. Okay. So, Krusty B23 can't wait for a Doge kid to stumble over the extraterrestrial office list Gary McKinnon found. David Allen.
They won't.
Okay. David Allen says, has Elon Musk created a super hacker AI to get more UFO files and secret patents than Gary McKinnon? And
No. Hold on.
Okay.
I want to hear the rest of that, but I want to respond to that immediately.
Mm-hmm.
Musk is not interested in UFO file disclosure. He has it. He has all kinds of knowledge in relation to that, but he's controlled because he's SpaceX he's a military defense contractor. They can't disclose those things except the false CIA disclosure version. He's opted not to opt in on the UFO thing at all. So no, they're not going to find that. They're not interested in that. This is a different exercise. So let's separate that very clearly. They're not going after UFO anything. Especially Musk. He's the last person, as I've just mentioned. Yes.
Okay, and to check how many secrets might have been lost to China, Israel, and others? Let me follow that up with this question.
Yeah.
It connects. Fooper Fighter says, my 2 cents worth for the benefit of all those worried about Elon is that he can already read all those files. He's playing a much bigger game.
No, he can't, because if they can't, Treasury access is not something that you can just get. The president has to give you that access. He has the ability to do a lot of spying because of the satellites and everything else, but that's risky, So no, I don't see. I think that what Musk did with X, even if it was opportunist, had a positive impact, and I think that they're trying to parlay that impact into other things, and obviously it's working. But I don't think a carte blanche approach with a defense contractor who denies the existence of the UFO file, and to think, that's the old hero worship thing that the Q people did with Trump. That was not a good approach either. So what you need is just a very sober, clear eye on that. And it works out better because you get to see the actual things that these people do that are positive and the other things that they're doing for long-term benefit for their own, multi-billion-dollar companies. You have to be real on that. Okay, a couple of things. Anything else?
That's it for now.
A couple of things that are really interesting. A lot of people don't think about FBI and UFOs.
Nope.
Well, we've just exposed, there's now, as of this week, on record, for Ryan Graves, of all people, the identity of a UFO working group in the FBI who are afraid of getting thrown out because of their J6 activity. Here's an article that came out in a British newspaper 4 days ago. FBI destroyed thousands of UFO reports, 1949 memo reveals. Agents routinely destroyed reports containing nothing of FBI interest due to lack of filing space. The FBI was so overwhelmed with sightings of flying saucers in the 40s that agents routinely destroyed reports because of lack of filing space. So, of course, they had unlimited filing space for everything. So that's ridiculous. But what they did is their reporting went black at a certain point. This is the key aspect. The policy is outlined in a memo sent on August 16th, 1949 to J. Edgar Hoover, who was the director of the FBI, along with documents on UFOs compiled by agents after statements from witnesses. The note, sent by an unnamed FBI agent in San Antonio, Texas, states that the office destroyed UFO reports on the ground as they arrived in great numbers and contained nothing of FBI interest. This article gets even more interesting. I'm going to give you some more of this. The documents are among a batch of papers related to UFO sightings that's been made available through the FBI's online record database. This is their own trove, so it's not a great breakthrough. It's just them stating a position that they had. Oh, we got rid of all that UFO stuff. In one intriguing note sent on March 22nd, 1950, Special Agent Guy Hoddle, the famous Hoddle memo, head of the FBI's Washington field office, wrote to Hoover with information on 3 so-called flying saucers that a witness claimed had crash-landed in New Mexico. 1950, though, 3 years after Roswell. According to the memo, an Air Force investigator stated that 3 flying saucers had been recovered in the area. along with the bodies of the alien crews. The memo goes on to add, each one was occupied by 3 bodies of human shape, but only 3 feet tall, dressed in metallic cloth of a very fine texture. Each body was bandaged in a manner similar to the blackout suits used by speed flyers and test pilots. According to one witness, the saucers were brought down by a high-powered government radar in the area that interfered with the spaceship's controls. No further evaluation was attempted, the memo concludes. And so it goes on from there. FBI Director Hoover claimed the FBI was not and never did investigate UFOs. This turned out to be a lie when a FOIA request was done and over 1,500 pages were released. Those pages didn't mean much, but it was at least served to illustrate that he was lying outright. But here's something very interesting. Early on, when the Roswell incident happened, etc., Hoover was very intrigued to get information about the Roswell incident. And there were forces inside of the Air Force and CIA who wanted to take over this entire subject. Roswell happened just 2 months before the CIA was officially created. And there's no question that with the wave of sightings from Kenneth Arnold and others, that, and there's a very interesting role that Kenneth Arnold plays in all this as somebody who was reporting things honestly about what happened. And they had a whole FBI campaign against Kenneth Arnold, as they had an FBI campaign against people like Silas Newton, who were a part of the Aztec UFO case in 1950. And they tried to discredit them from history, but Kenneth Arnold survived that discrediting. Unfortunately, Silas Newton didn't, and that's a very, very important case, including the fact that Silas was a very unusual millionaire, later played by David Bowie in The Man Who Fell to Earth. The story, though, of the Aztec crash from 1948 is actually the crash of an intact craft, not a complete splattered mess like the Roswell crash with all the weird hieroglyphics and everything else. So this is something that Hoover ran into action and decided, I need to quash this. Let's trump up some charges against Silas Newton relating to him overusing and having like fraudulent oil land leases and things of this nature. So they were able to kind of scare him off. They were also very concerned about Kennedy's knowledge around this, and Kennedy had been informed at a very young age in 1945 by Defense Secretary Forrestal, who took him to Berlin and said, this is what's going on. And when they killed Forrestal, it's very interesting because Kennedy, as a good friend, fellow Catholic, and just generally curious, pursued that story of him being, unceremoniously dumped out of a window at Bethesda Naval Hospital. And later would, during his presidency, take a well-publicized detour to go to Forrestal's grave. It's very interesting. One of the problems, I think, that the FBI had with Kennedy was his level of knowledge, including the fact in areas that they wanted and were intrigued to get into. And also the fact that he was having so much success so young, and also was not beholden to the money establishment there in Washington because his old man had made so much money that by the time he became senator with his brother, the Senate committee for McCarthy, he had an incredible power base. But this clash comes up dramatically, and it comes up in a very strange way because the story is taken often as a mafia story in the Kennedy lexicon. And it has to do with the actress Judith Exner. Judith Exner said something that's so important that should send ripples through the entire story of the UFO file. And Exner, of course, was a beautiful actress that Frank Sinatra introduced to President Kennedy. And she became, his on-again, off-again lover to a point where through her connections with Sam Giancana and her connections with defense contractors, quote unquote, in California, Kennedy was sending packages through her and send her on a train or a plane with this package. She would go there and bring a package back. During her final days, she got even more into detail on this. And it was very interesting because people who wanted to take down Kennedy's image, like Seymour Hersh, who wrote The Dark Side of Camelot, which is a tremendously terrible book from a good author. But what she said, actually, if you really read between the lines, debunked what he was trying to get at, that, oh, Kennedy was doing these payoffs with mafia people. Well, she said, you know, she was sitting during one of these trips back and forth on the train, and she's like, I want to know what they're sending back to Kennedy here. She stops, and she opens up this package. And the package is, in her description, a blueprint for an advanced aerospace device. She wasn't very technical, but she could see that much. So instead of them sending, you know, bribing Kennedy with money or whatever it happened to be, he's getting secret aerospace diagrams and blueprints. Hoover made dramatic overtures to Kennedy, including meeting him in the Oval Office and saying, your girlfriend knows Sam Giancana. Just thought I'd let you know, and I'll keep your secret. Don't worry about it. You know, so doing this kind of blackmail in the background, saying, oh, I know what you're doing. But it's very interesting, his motivation here, because, of course, Kennedy had all kinds of relationships with Marilyn Monroe and other people like that. Seems to me that Hoover was particularly interested in this one because he wanted to derail it. And he told Kennedy that as a result of their meeting that he would heavily advise never seeing Miss Exner again. Now, a lot of people have looked at that in history and said, oh, yeah, you know, Hoover was obsessed with Kennedy's sex life and saw this, you know, girl who was with Kennedy is also in the mafia. But let's look at it from this other angle. Let's look at it from the angle that Hoover has spent a lifetime trying to get in on the UFO file information and had as early as the Roswell situation. That the entire X aspect of the technology comes to us from an FBI agent named Guy Bannister, who's deeply involved in the Kennedy assassination. As a matter of fact, the more I go into Guy Bannister's life, I spent some time revisiting Garrison's book, The Trail of the Assassins, which if you really read what he has to say about Bannister, it's very, very interesting. Because he basically calls Bannister the ultimate handler and says, oh, he's always pushing someone else to the front and staying in the shadows. And that's deep in the UFO file approach of a guy like that. What's interesting with him, of course, is that he will run Lee Harvey Oswald out of a New Orleans private eye office. And that will be the summer before the assassination. What's interesting when you really look at Bannister from this point of view, we'll just take a minute on him. He was the FBI chief in Chicago. Who else came out of Chicago? Jack Ruby. Mm-hmm. So obviously he was aware of Ruby and all of Ruby's mafia doings there if he was the chief in the 40s. He comes up with the designation X for the UFO file. This is very important because they use X particularly to hide the technology and move it through the different government agencies. So it can't be tracked, especially for black projects, you know. And trust me, Doge will never get anywhere near the X technology because SpaceX is an X-branded company. There's a reason why they're SpaceX and he's X and all that, because he knows about the X technology. He's, you know, the X puppet that they're putting up there. And, you know, I just want to say this on the record, which is I've laid this out before he came out with the X thing. And I mean, he was out there and everything, but the steganography has to be understood around X. If we leave that out, it's like, you know, leaving the Rosetta Stone out of the hieroglyphics. It's that important. And so let's, you know, we have to really, when it gets around Musk, just think of it more as a corporation that has a number of voices funneling through one personality, you know. And if that personality got out of hand, they would zap him pretty quickly, or lawsuit, or a scandal of some kind. So certainly he has to toe the line, as it were. But we have to think to ourselves: how would you feel if Jeff Bezos had access to Treasury information? That wouldn't be so good, would it? I don't think it's good with Elon either. But going back to Hoover and Exner and JFK, I think we can kind of look at some of these incidents and things in history, and particularly Hoover's intense dislike for Kennedy, as again mirrored in the intense dislike for Trump, who comes in and is also not beholden to this establishment, but also comes in with that UFO file information, in this case through his uncle, John Trump, the professor at MIT, who, after all, was the protege of Vannevar Bush, who was the head of the UFO file, according to the top physicist. Not some spooky MJ-12 document, on the record conversation 3 times, top physicist Robert Sarbarker. So we have that much. Those are the things to work with when we get to this. But the question is, what was the UFO piece worth to the FBI, and what were they doing with it in the 50s? That's the next part of what we're doing here in the special episode. We'll go into that, and then we'll take your questions. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. Whew, this is the FBI and the UFO file secret revealed. We're going to be taking your questions here momentarily. And I want to remind you, especially if you're new here, to go to darkjournalist.com and sign up for our newsletter. It's a free newsletter, but it keeps us in touch, and it lets you know about the incredible things that we have coming up for you. Interviews, the first quarter of 2025, February and March, they're going to blow your mind. We have the best things lined up. X-Series episodes that will be off the charts. Documentaries. We have a new docuseries, of course, following NASA, JFK, and the UFO file. And also the CRAZE and the HOTZONE, which is another docuseries. We're doing them both, and we're filming new episodes of both. So all that's in there in the newsletter, and I'm sure live events are coming up later this year as well. So stand up and be counted. That's a free newsletter. Go to darkjournalist.com and make sure you sign up for that newsletter. It's the best way to get us around the intense censorship. Okay, what do you got?
I got 3 I'm linking. Seeing Sight says the U.S. government does not have extraterrestrial technology. If it did, our technology in use would be more advanced. Dardy says, did you hear Treasury people told Doge 100 billion goes out to unknown accounts annually?
Yeah.
Is this money for the breakaway civilization? And Rotten Cryptobit says, Elon knows the, quote, UFOs are lost breakaway civilization from underground. This links to his boring companies.
Well, one thing we can say with him as the CEO of SpaceX, and which is well known in certain circles, that he has this incredible collection of UFO information. So he's read into a degree on the UFO file. There's no doubt about that. But he also likes to pretend, oh no, there are no aliens, and I've never seen any, So he's glib, he's flip. He acts like a frat boy. He does all these stupid things, but that's to mask a deep knowledge base, but also who's the puppet masters in the background, And you can't play in space, as Bob Bigelow found out, You can't do anything in space without the government working with you. That's their domain. The Air Force and the Space Force runs space. That's it. It's not like you could have some great idea and say, I'm going to do things in space on my own. So let's be realistic about what they can and can't do and the control levels that they're under. Maybe some people would say, well, if he exposes the UFO file, they'll take all his contracts away. It's probably true, the secrecy agreement. So, but let's not pretend that he's going to give any UFO disclosures. That's a joke. He never will. What else you got?
Well, Joseph Tuca says the ring makers of Saturn are concerning.
Yeah.
Can you link this to that issue?
Well, what's going to make you happy is I have an episode coming up on them. So I'd like to drill down the rest of the FBI piece, but I will say this, that when you get around Norm Berggren's work, the scientist who worked on it and then put the book out about it, which I've had the book for years, that he saw these gigantic craft sort of fueling up in the rings of Saturn through his work. And he's a major black project scientist. And they showed that information to President Reagan, and I'm sure it scared him, but they wanted the threat thing. We don't know what those craft were about, who was operating them, and what was going on. But what we do know is that Berggren was a respected enough scientist that Reagan took him very seriously. So this is where you start getting all those references during the Reagan era to, if we could get together as a group and fight off the aliens, which he would do. And, I've made a point of this, which is it gets missed a lot. I don't know how this gets missed. Colin Powell wrote an autobiography before he died. And there's a big section in there about how he used to control Reagan's speeches as best he could. And Reagan, for a particular period of time in 1987, kept talking about this alien threat idea and how we could get together as a world and fight it off. I wonder if our differences would vanish and things of this nature. Well, when you think about it that way, at a certain point in that book, he says, I was rubbing out in all of his speeches. I would get rid of that little bit about the aliens, but he put it back in for a couple of major speeches at the UN, and I still kick myself today that I didn't get rid of those. So Colin Powell didn't want that. So Reagan was really hell-bent on getting his message out about this. And the thing about Gorbachev saying that they discussed the UFO file and that Reagan said, will you help us if they attack us, is gigantic, because that was never on the record until 2014. So we have it on the record. It's public. That's the end of that. So we know that that's what they were talking about. What we also realize is whenever you get the American president around the Soviet leader during the Kennedy era and the Reagan era, they always try to insert State Department and CIA people in the meetings. So Kennedy said, no, just me and the translator. And they were mad about that. And they were like, oh, he's selling out the country. Then Reagan does it, and he says, I just want, at Reykjavik, I just want me and Gorbachev, the translator. And then finally, Trump and Putin. Same exact thing. Well, in their case, they really freak out, right? They're like, oh, he's Putin's puppet. And this guy, forget it. He's colluding with Putin for a takeover of America. Well, that's a good way to keep two leaders away because when they talk on their own, they can discuss the UFO file. That's major. If they make their own decisions, that entire apparatus of the State Department, CIA, and the black projects loses their power, loses their hold. That's what they're afraid of the most. And I'd like to see bigger overtures towards the Putin administration from the Trump administration in this early phase. Maybe they're going on behind the scenes, but let's see. Yeah.
Blazing River, is there any reason not to think the secret Space Force is already using zero-point energy? Glenn McEnroe says, if Elon knows about UFOs, why would he continue to design fueled rockets to travel to Mars? And Free responds, Musk has top secret clearance in relation to SpaceX. It's likely he's not allowed to talk about certain things as part of his contract. Yeah. If he had the go-ahead, no doubt he'd build Tesla's spaceships.
Oh, yeah, they won't give him the go-ahead. That's not... They're not interested in sharing the technology. We have to be clear. The X-Share people, when they move into the public scene to share things, they usually get discredited or killed. And that goes all the way back to Morris Jessup. It goes back to James McDonald. And, I think even people like Mac Tonnies. So people who get around this subject, who are in the X-Share wing of this, or get intel from the X-Share wing. The X-Protect group, although they don't exercise, they'll exercise a number of different protocols before they get to a lethal protocol. But the X-Protect group has exercised lethal protocol with a number of deep UFO people, including researchers. So these people do not want to share the technology. They may want to, this whole thing that we talk about here, the breaking back in, they have this technology they developed in the background, say for a century or so, and here they are rolling this out. They want to make a profit off of it. This is where you have all these Congress people talking about it. So they're going to roll out something, but they want a false CIA threat story to do it. They want a UFO threat story. That's why you see the whistleblowers like Lou and all the rest of it. Now, there's a thing here about Spielberg putting out a movie next year called Disclosure. And Spielberg was clued in very, very early on. Oh, here it is. He was clued in. Oh, and it's Moskowitz, the Florida congressman from COG, who is pumping up, it's time for disclosure, right? Yeah, because then somebody like Moskowitz working for COG, if they get disclosure, they also get the ability to do an emergency powers thing. So this is a problem. But that thing about close encounters, there was a push there in the late 70s, and I think it was a mixed push. It was like there were X-Share people involved, and I think that they thought they couldn't control the UFO file, so they were going to let some of it out. That's where the Close Encounters movie came from. And so when you look at Spielberg and some of the things he was doing in that period of time, for him to come back with this is disturbing, because the only real disclosure you're seeing is a bunch of CIA junk on top, counterintelligence people, News Nation doing the egg story, really discrediting stuff, and false disclosures like Immaculate Constellation. So some people have said to me with a straight face, well, even false disclosure or them lying is still better than no disclosure. No, it's not. It's really not. It's worse. So, we have to get it clear that the whole CIA, NGA, NRO false disclosure narrative is not worth anything. That's a threat disclosure funded by some of the blackest operators on the planet. You don't want to have anything to do with that.
It also, can I comment?
Yeah.
It sets a terrible precedent.
Yes.
I keep likening this to a woman whose husband, she finds out, has been cheating on her or something like this. I think actually reducing it to something like that is really easy to understand. You don't want if there's been deception, when he's telling the truth about it, you want the full truth, the whole truth, all of it, all of the ugly truth. You don't want it minimized. It's like you come clean
think about
or
it.
you don't. Right?
Well, that's interesting. It's like, if you grew up and you found out that, your parents weren't the parents that you thought that they were, and, it was somebody else. So then if they lie to you about who your parents are, how are you any better off if you didn't get the truth? It's ridiculous. So no, the partial disclosure, or at least we're getting something, is craziness.
Well, it's an insult to us.
Well, and also, is that injected too? Is that not something that people think, and it shows up, as like a false?
Well, yeah, we settle because we're used to being abused. So
Yes,
that's
exactly.
what we have to look at ourselves in the mirror and say, why am I settling for this? I'm better than this. I deserve better.
Speaking of abuse, Elizondo was on the PBD podcast this week. And I haven't watched too many PBD shows, so forgive me if I'm ignorant of PBD's thing. But what is interesting is just previously, Stephen Greer was on there calling out Elizondo for what he is, a paid CIA counterintelligence disinformation agent. That's just a fact. And, they have others that are out there doing the same thing. It's not just him, but it is important to realize that he is. And but a very interesting series of things came up there because, so Lou is firing back saying, I'm the most legitimate thing. And Greer is all this disinformation and all this stuff. So it's a weird thing that's going on right now. There's a group that was, represented by Greer and his research that really understands that this Mellon group is complete CIA disinfo people. That's important. But also, what's interesting is with people like Greer also, like you kind of need a new wing in order to do this, because what you also see with people like Greer is there can be a lot of marketing aspect attached to it. Lately he's done a lot of things that have glommed onto the whole JFK UFO file stuff that we've done documentaries on. And I think it's important, that it's not marketing and it's not intel people. It's like the real thing. And it's funny. The only reason I even mention that is, PPD was questioning Greer about all this stuff. And Greer said, I have this secret document from Robert Kennedy about UFOs. And I got this from one of my secret guys or whatever. Well, you guys on this program are very aware of me hunting down these books of Paris Flamand, which are very hard to get, called Assassination of America. I think it took me a year to do it, and Miss Olivia can tell you that. But in a program from, I think, a year and a half ago, I showed the letter from the Paris Flamand book. It's not a secret Greer whistleblower document. It's in the Paris Flamand book. And we showed that on here, and it is important to get it around. But you can see, you have to be careful with marketing and stuff. This stuff comes from Paris Flamand, who wrote not only about Assassination of America and all this deep state stuff, but wrote two very interesting books on UFOs. One was called The Age of Flying Saucers. That's where that's where that letter appears. And it is interesting. It's a real letter from Robert Kennedy. And it says, it's a letter to Gray Barker, who famously wrote the Men in Black books. And there's an exchange that's going on there. But what it says is, as you may know, this is Senator Kennedy talking to Barker in 1968. I'm a card-carrying member of the Amalgamated Flying Saucers Association. Therefore, like many other people in our country, I'm interested in the phenomena of flying saucers. It's a fascinating subject that has initiated both scientific fiction fantasies and serious scientist research. I watch with great interest all reports of unidentified flying objects, and I hope someday we will know more about this intriguing subject. There's a little more there, but that's the letter, and it comes out of Paris Flamand's book. It's not a whistleblower got this document for me or anything like that. And Flamand's books can be hard to get, but still, I think that was, it's very clear. We put that out like a year and a half ago. So, when I see stuff like that, I don't, I feel like there should be more accountability for how things are presented. But nonetheless, it was important, I think, that what we got there was Greer was calling out Lou as the disinformation agent. So bravo to him for that. I'll give him some props for that. All right, I've got more here, Miss Olivia, but I think because of the time, I'm going to go right to your questions, and that's you.
Okay. George Vankovich, do you think Elon Musk has the tech for a mass exodus of the elite to Mars
Yes.
and has already set something up?
Yeah.
How would we know?
Well, here's the other thing. No, of course they do. That's the secret space program. The whole precedent that we set with the secret space program research and the conferences and everything else, and that includes, Dr. Farrell's work and all the great things that we were able to put together. I even got Linda Moulton Howe on that one, who did a great presentation on it. What's interesting is, when Apollo stops doing their missions in 1972, there's no explanation for that. So that's 52 years now of not having a manned mission to the moon. Now they have Artemis, tons of delays. Oh, they're going to do it, So in the meantime, they set up a gigantic infrastructure to privatize space. And the more that they've set up that infrastructure, we've also seen this COG underground infrastructure. That was the model. They just flipped it and they moved it into space. So that's what we're looking for when it comes to space, which is information about the secret space program. Of course, Gary McKinnon, I think, the NASA hacker, I think he got some of the best information about it because of the off-world officers list. I think that tells us a great deal because we don't know anything about that, obviously. And the revelation, I believe, it's like 20 years old now. It's 2004, somewhere along there. And there were discussions, and I even found the term secret space program in Ken Thomas's book from 1998. So this has been moving around, but the real kind of foundation of some of it comes from that great McKinnon, seeing those files. That has to be understood, that there's been so much more going on in relation to space, but also that these elites have a weird connection to space. Look at Gigi Young's work on Mars and the overemphasis on Mars from an esoteric point of view. That's something that we've presented when we did some Mars episodes relating to Steiner's work and Edgar Cayce in terms of what he talks about what Mars represents. So, and how it relates back here even to Belial and the Atlantean period and all the rest. When we talk about UFOs, you have to bring in the Atlantean ancient advanced civilization, because otherwise you're just thinking there's some off-world technology visiting here, and they're just like us, except they're more advanced technologically. That's not a really complete story, because we've found hints and evidence, and there's an incredible backdrop of mystery school literature about an advanced ancient culture. So Atlantis, we got the story from Plato. Edgar Cayce gives us, 900 readings on Atlantis over 40 years. That's pretty consistent. Theosophy, anthroposophy, the Gurdjieff work, it's all Atlantis. The mystery schools kept the information, have released the information as best they could in this steady process since the 19th century. So we have to deal with that as a culture. It's actually a bigger disclosure because that is the advanced two-eye stone Atlantean, space travel, air travel. And so all of this has to figure into our thinking when we're researching these things. It's not easy to track what's right and what's not. But how about the idea that these Atlanteans somehow figured out a way early on to do space travel to places like Mars, and that's why we find ruins there? Or there was a civilization on Mars that aged itself out and came here. I mean, whatever those things happen to be, on the elite side, there's an absolute obsession with Mars. There's no doubt about it. And I think that Elon prediction in von Braun's work that we've highlighted so heavily goes a great deal to disclosing that. Yes.
Ray Story, I read Lou Elizondo was reported to be the man in black in a case involving an eyewitness abduction via UFO in New York City near the Brooklyn Bridge. Ever heard that one?
I talked to him on a few different occasions, and it's absolutely true. And it's interesting because when Elizondo came out, it was like 15 years after the incident. And he was like, oh, that's the guy who they sent in to interrogate me and then followed me. This is what they used Lou for. He was the muscle to get information on these cases. And the FBI had groups like that, but the Central Intelligence Agency, the X-Protect types, they track very hardcore people who've had those experiences. Also, people who've had those experiences are much more valuable in terms of insights about what we're dealing with. And so, containing them or shaping their opinions. Do you know how many FBI and Air Force people were on Betty and Barney Hill as soon as their case got reported? To try and spin them in a particular direction away from the real story. So this is what we're dealing with. And it is hardcore. I have a quote. I'm trying to think which book it is. Oh, it is. It's in John Keel's book. I had a lot of kind of quick hits in some of these books here, which if we thread the needle, we're really getting somewhere. This is very interesting. I've talked about the incredible coincidence of these names that keep coming up related to the UFO file and also the mystery schools. And some of those names are Ketchum and Jessup. And, to people who have those names, they might think to themselves, oh, I never heard that, but it's true. I can tell you. It's quite interesting. And it's obviously means the name has some very magical qualities to it. Now, this is interesting. This is John Keel going in along a point like that. which I found kind of intriguing. Let's see if I can bring this out. Back in 1964, the Social Security Administration released a list of the most common surnames in the United States based on a compared readout of their records. The top 10 were ordinarily Smith, Johnson, Williams, Brown, Jones, Miller, Davis, Martin, Anderson, Wilson. Even if you take a comparatively small population, such as 37 presidents, you'll find 3 head names in the top 10, Andrew Johnson, Woodrow Wilson, and Lyndon Johnson. Why are there so few Wilsons and Johnsons among UFO witnesses? Simple odds alone should give us more Smiths than Smithowskis. In 1966, people with the surname Reeves were caught up in the UFO game. The members of a Reeves family in Oregon were driven from their home by eerie lights that passed through walls and chased them from room to room like ball lightning. But this was definitely not ball lightning. While larger objects hovered above their roof and more shadowy little figures moved about them in their fields. A few months before that, John Reeves, no relation, of Brooksville, Florida, claimed contact with a being in a spacesuit who landed on a sand dune. One of the most prominent UFO investigators of the 1950s and 60s was an engineer named Bryant Reeves. And so he goes on with this, but it's very interesting because he gets to this odd little fact here. Hopkinsville, Kentucky, has a chief claim to fame. It was the boyhood home of Edgar Cayce, the sleeping prophet. Celebrated medium and philosopher. On the night of August 21st, 1955, however, a family named Sutton reportedly saw a light land on their property and several silvery little men with elephantine ears attack their farmhouse. The Sutton men grabbed their rifles and fired at the creatures for hours. When they saw they had hit one of the fellows, he would somersault. They had amazing agility and come back for more. Finally, the family piled into their jalopy in Hopkinsville and went for the sheriff. On the way back, the sheriff saw a light rising in the sky. There was no question but that the horrified family had seen something, and the bullet holes all over the property proved they had been desperately shooting at something. It's interesting to me because the amount of apparitions that take place with Cayce in Hopkinsville when he's growing up and seeing, forget about the whole Bledsoe lady thing. That's it's a very early Edgar Cayce story, but it is interesting to me, and I've tried to point this out about the names, and Keel was finding this. Keel also found these little levels of electronic disturbance, and he has a whole list of these different things associated with the UFO file experience that fall directly into that apothegm category. So we can see when you start to go at it from an individual level, you're getting somewhere. As an investigator, he was a newspaper man. That's when you're going into a good place. If you start dealing with counterintelligence people, forget it. And if they start giving you the secret of life is, symbols from Lou Elizondo, then you're lost. You're gone. You started off looking for something in this, and the CIA took you and disposed of you in a marketing heap. So this is the nature of the problem. Yes, what do you got?
Yeah, on that note, Blazing Rubber says, would Elizondo be the kind to force info out of someone and then claim the info as his own?
Oh, yeah, excellent point. Well, I've seen him plagiarize terribly. We just saw he got caught plagiarizing Carl Sagan. And there's so many plagiarists in this field. And what's interesting is the plagiarists are getting together now. It's like a plagiarist convention. Mm-hmm. And so you have guys like Jesse Michaels promoting Elizondo. And they're both, they like to just take information and pretend that they studied it when they didn't. They're just, they're good ripoff artists. It's interesting to me, too, that, if you wanted to go into this field and really get to the truth, it's interesting to me that these people would start with CIA people. It's like they don't understand. They didn't study what the CIA was all about, and counterintelligence in particular. The training is so deep on how to be a good liar that the whole point is that you are deceiving another nation about our strengths and weaknesses, our activities, and all the rest of it. And so if somebody has that many qualities, if they just send them out on another job, which is, hey, we have a UFO threat thing, we think we can pull it off, we're not sure, but we're going to roll you out there, and you're going to pretend you were the captain of this UFO program called ATIP, which we know that didn't really exist, but, just play along with that, and then we'll give you all the backing as we go. And I think that got into trouble at different times, and now they're pushing it really hardcore, with the whole, film and all the rest of it. And, if they want to do, counterintelligence movies about UFOs, that's their problem. But my job is on the dark journalism side is to show you and to keep an eye and to report on the fact that this counterintelligence UFO file threat operation is in existence and being rolled out. And I keep the closest possible eye on that and report to you here. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. This is the FBI and the UFO file secret reveal. There's more to come. And we're going to take more questions for, say, the next 15 minutes or so. I'll try to inject as many things as I can in here. And, of course, I'm going to bring back the FBI and the UFO file because I have a whole very, very interesting piece about the FBI involvement in the crashed saucer case in New Mexico. Now, I want to remind everyone, especially if you're new here, to go to darkjournalist.com and sign up for a newsletter. It's a free newsletter, but it keeps us in touch through the massive, and I mean massive, censorship that we've been seeing. There's so many important things that are going on day by day, as we've seen. So let's make sure you're on that. It's a free newsletter. You'll get it once a week, and it'll just let you know about the remarkable, and I mean incredible shows we have coming up for you. X-Series episodes that'll blow your mind, interviews, like you haven't seen, and coming up between here and, say, April 1st. Wow, we've got some incredible stuff for you. And documentary series. We have this new docu-series. What's up there right now, JFK, The Final Speech. That's all. There's an incredible piece in there about Antarctica and the UFO file in relation to JFK. And we put a lot of production and information into that. You will not find anything like that in any other place. And of course, the CRAZE and the HOTZONE, that's the Hacking Atlantis. You've got episode 1 there that we put out. Got a great response, but just wait till you have part 2 on that one. So these docuseries, that's all part in the newsletter as well. Make sure you stand up and be counted. Miss Olivia, give us the last round of questions.
Okay, Najat Madri, we're so focused on what's happening in our skies. We really need to focus on what's happening underground. Every major ancient historical site has some kind of underground access. Why?
Well, it's interesting. Remember the biblical thing about in the mount? There's a secret in the mount. Moses meets, God on Mount Sinai. There's something about the earth. There's something about crystals. There's something about all of these elements, and they're secrets that we haven't discovered all the answers to. But certainly, when it came to groups operating underground, there was incredible efforts around this, and I think this is how they maintained the mystery schools on a number of different levels physically. One of the things that's interesting to me when I think about this is that we've never had an era in our history where the technology would allow them to do things, like the boring thing that Elon Musk is doing. And but the fact that we know the continuity of government and this whole lopsided dynamic that takes place in the government now as a result of that came about right during that period when Eisenhower was doing this incredible construction project for the highways of America, which improved the country dramatically, but it also gave them the cover that they needed to set these bases up. I think the problem is, and what we've seen with the deep events in history always being related to continuity of government players, everything from the Kennedy assassination to 9/11 to COVID, that you start to, after a while, lose the oversight. And this was what was happening with Kennedy and the CIA during that era. It's why it's so important to spotlight what took place there, because President Kennedy's actions, we still don't quite understand the dynamic of what he was doing, unplugging this machinery that was building up, and he saw as the buildup to a totalitarian state. And he saw space as the ultimate, arbiter of how this is going to work out. Because if they militarize space, it's over. If they keep space as a discovery, a place of discovery, and if, humanity can throw their hats over the roof of going to the moon and Mars, as he was saying, then we might move the culture in a totally different direction. So, it was Gorbachev who said, and he said it while he was giving a speech at the Texas School Book Depository. Try that one on for political messaging. But he said in 2012 that Kennedy was so far advanced in his thinking that we're just catching up to him now. And he was the leader of the Soviet Union during a crucial time. For him to think that of Kennedy lets us know that Kennedy and the battles that were taking place during his administration, in their archetype, in their fundamentals, are the same battles. The players have changed, the years have passed, but the battles themselves about an underground government, a covert government ruling things above, and the overt government having to constantly pick up the pieces whenever this group comes in and then retreats. This is a very crucial geopolitical understanding. Yes.
Tina Boric. DJ, did CIA William Casey brief President Reagan on the UFO and alien issue?
Yes. Oh, Reagan was one of the most advanced on the UFO file as a president. And he got information from a lot of different sources, too. He'd seen his own and had used Air Force One to chase it. And it's interesting, as a governor, he had seen UFOs. And Lucille Ball talks about what a UFO enthusiast he was, that he understood how important the subject was. By the time he got into the White House, then you can see, when he's talking to Gorbachev about if it's a threat or whatever. I'm sure that there was a steady effort because of his knowledge level to tell him, hey, look, this is a threat. What's interesting also, if you think about Reagan, is since we're talking about Spielberg tonight, Spielberg has that fascinating story where he says, they play at the White House E.T. the movie, and Reagan stands up after it and says, everyone in this room knows that that's not fiction. It's a real story. So, there are lots and lots of clues with Reagan, including the fact that he was very deeply into Manly P. Hall. Yes. Vix
Tech says Lucille Ball, Gene Roddenberry, Star Trek, right?
Yes.
Desi Lou.
Yes. Oh, forget it. She was brilliant. Here's the guy Hottle memo, folks. So make sure we didn't leave you without that. Before I read it, I'm going to read this. The Army did not want the FBI's help on UFOs at first. On July 30th, 1947, the FBI issued this notice to all of its offices. Flying Discs, the Bureau, at the request of the Army Air Force Intelligence, the Bureau has agreed to cooperate in the investigation of flying discs. That puts them on the record. They're on. You should investigate each instance which is brought to your attention of a sighting of a flying disc in order to ascertain whether or not it's a bona fide sighting, an imaginary one, or a prank. And what happens is their investigations have to go black 3 years later. But when they give this out, this is how Guy Bannister is sent on his tour of the Pacific Northwest to investigate cases. And one of the things I found out about Bannister, which I'll get into in another episode, is that he gave a public hall meeting in Idaho about the UFOs that everyone was seeing, including the fact that he went to crash sites and things. He was trying to tell people about what was going on, but really what he was doing was getting information. And so our friend Bannister is so important in the setup of the UFO file from the FBI level. Later, he works for the CIA and the FBI. But later, he also shows up coaching Lee Harvey Oswald to act like a Marxist and be provocative and say he loves Cuba and all, Castro and all that. Jim Garrison would say that of all of the witnesses in the case of the JFK assassination, he thought that Guy Bannister, who he knew well when he was in the FBI, and by the way, Garrison was also stationed in the Pacific Northwest during that period, which meant if he knew Bannister and they were so close during that period, when Bannister's doing his UFO investigations in 47 and 48, so is Garrison. Garrison's right around there. So, Garrison, there's a deep, it's very interesting to me. The 16 files associated with the Garrison case are one of the gems that the CIA has kept all this time. Yes.
This is fascinating. Nanette Chris says, I gave Reagan Colonel Bearden's scalar info because the Pentagon and NASA rejected it. He used it for his Star Wars speech. Soviets were in the final months of perfecting it as a weapon.
Well, that is absolutely fascinating.
I'd like more information about
that. Well, what's interesting is Lyndon LaRouche, of all people, talked about having a very frank conversation with Reagan about Star Wars and how it was basically, Reagan was concerned about it being misused. And LaRouche saying, whatever you do, don't set it up the way they want you to. And he was going to give him access to scientists and all the rest of it. And then they cut LaRouche off from Reagan. And eventually, LaRouche was that guy who ran for president every time out and never won anything. But he was in there feeding out details at times that were important. So, Guy Hoddle's memo, shall we?
Mm-hmm, please.
An investigator for the Air Force. This is Hoddle sending this to Hoover. And he's a special agent for the FBI. And he's just heard about this crash in the New Mexico desert. But it's 1950. Remember, it's 3 years after Roswell, 2 years after Aztec. An investigator for the Air Force stated 3 so-called flying saucers had been recovered in New Mexico. They were described as being circular in shape with raised centers approximately 50 feet in diameter. Each one was occupied by 3 bodies of human shape, only 3 feet tall, dressed in metallic cloth or a very fine texture. Each body was bandaged in a manner similar to the blackout suits worn by flyers. That's an interesting observation. According to our informant, the saucer was found in New Mexico due to the fact that government is using a very high-powered radar setup in that area, and it is believed that the radar interfered with the controlling mechanics of the saucers. No further evaluation was attempted. So that was one that kind of slipped through the cracks. I will say this. It's very interesting that they're talking about the fact that this radar would take down, these saucers. Here's what's interesting about that. Some people say, well, you have this advanced craft and they're going to come over here and just crash, and I've pointed out the whole law of accident thing, that even, the greatest stuff we've ever had in the world has crashed, So you can be an advanced civilization and you're still going to have accidents because there are accidents even in creation, right? We have planets that explode. Not everything's perfect. Probably the crashes aren't as frequent. It might happen over stretches of time. But is it possible that there was something here related to this Melchizedek device thing that we've discussed on this program that was used intentionally to take these craft down and did work? So you're going to be hearing more about the Melchizedek device. We did 2 episodes on Brother Sunburst. And this, I'm going to read you a little FBI-related tidbit relating to that device, which is the same device, by the way, that the FBI sent John Trump, Professor Trump, the uncle of President Trump, in to find among Tesla's papers and effects. So what book is that now? That book is a Nick Redfern book on contactees, which again, I love reading these books. They come in kind of cynical. They're like, oh, this fruitcake, that fruitcake, Adamski this, Adamski that. But what's interesting is Adamski is so researched and so harassed by the FBI that you have to wonder exactly what was going on there, as opposed to the spin of the guy being a fraud and all the rest of it. And I've put that forward in relation to Aztec. As soon as you research the case, you realize it's entirely legitimate. And it's just the fact that the FBI discredited it and then put people through legal battles and all the rest of it that the thing got lost. And, the rationale of the FBI for why there was a false UFO thing involved in the Aztec case, they said Silas Newton wanted to sell this oil finding device, and he wanted a phony story of these crashed UFO to do it. Well, look, he had $50 million in 1948. I believe that's something like $700 million now. I don't think this guy, was spending all this time and effort on that, and they never had a case against him that won. So the whole discrediting of the Aztec thing was to help that X-Protect group get people off of paying attention to this Aztec crash, which, by the way, was one of the first big UFO books by Frank Scully. Okay, here we go. Are you ready? George Adamski, of course, the famous contactee, they were tapping his phone, trying to figure out, who's this guy talking to? The FBI, that is. Adamski stated that within the next 12 months, San Diego may be bombed. Adamski stated, this is one of their reports. Adamski stated that it does not make any difference if the United States has more atom bombs than Russia, inasmuch as Russia will only need 10 atom bombs to cripple the United States by placing them simultaneously in such spots as Chicago and other vivid centers of the country. The United States today is in the same state of deterioration as it was during the Roman Empire, he said, prior to its collapse, and it will fall just like the Roman Empire did. The government in this country is corrupt. It's a corrupt form of government, and the capitalists are enslaving the poor. FBI document on Adamski. But wait. Things got worse for Adamski in January of 1953 when the FBI was told Adamski had in his possession a machine that could draw flying saucers and airplanes down from the sky. That's the UFO killer. It's an object, a device, not a person, remember. That's the Melchizedek device. So keep that in mind, that this is something, when they're tapping into his conversations, he gets on the phone, and then they get over hearing this, and they go over 6 agents and interrogate him and basically beat him up. And he gives them the name of some scientist, just to get them off the trail. Because of his close association with Van Tassel, it's my conclusion that Brother Sunburst somehow got his hands on this device and hid it in the Sunburst Ranch. And I've talked to some people who were at that ranch about a very unusual device that was there. And I'm going to do a whole lot on that coming up. I want to mention to you also that Brother Sunburst's Organic Sunburst Ranch, which basically is the foundation of like Whole Foods and all that kind of thing. His ranch was right next door to Reagan. So yeah, there's a lot there. Yes.
Okay, I want to make sure I ask this question. It's a little off topic, but I love it.
Okay.
Cece is saying ancient aliens are us returning from our first trip to Mars. Why not? LOL.
Yeah. I like that. It's an excellent point. Now, how edgy is that? But if you look and you will see when they really question Casey on this, and I'll do more shows on this because I think Casey needs to be brought into the fore of the conversation about Atlantean advanced technology. I think his readings are some of the most cutting edge stuff. It's the least advertised stuff from the Casey Foundation, the ARE. They don't like to promote Atlantis because I think it makes, they're worried it makes them seem unusual. But you're not going to get around it. Casey was unusual. And he has the most complete story of Atlantis there. But at a certain point, they said, where could they travel, the Atlanteans, with their amazing technology? He said, anywhere in the universe their mind led them to. So There were no limits. They could go anywhere. That's the technology. That was the ability of the technology. And remember, when he's describing it, they're trying to get a handle on it because flight is fairly new when they're asking him questions. And they're like, did his planes, did the planes of the Atlanteans fly over mountains? And Casey said, well, they flew over mountains and through them. All right, that's disintegration of matter. That's pretty advanced two-eye stone technology there. And after the incredible deluge and the destruction, did the technology survive? There's so many accounts, there's so many hieroglyphs and things in Egypt that show, things that look exactly like flying machines. And I will say this also, that Casey is putting across, I love to go back to this Ezekiel story, when they're like, why don't you describe one of these craft? What did it look like? And Casey said, well, that's easy. If you look at what Ezekiel described, wheel within a wheel, that his whole experience, he said that's what the Atlantean crafts were, but this was a much later date when Ezekiel is dealing with it. So, Ezekiel, there's a 9,000, 10,000 year difference between the sinking of Atlantis and when Ezekiel is there. Somebody obviously is still flying the stuff 9,000 years later. So somebody had it. There's a lot in your question about, were we able to do this before? That's part of the memory issue, subconscious memory issue. And it's reincarnation memory as well, because if you were there and you did it, so much more. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show, FBI and the UFO file secret revealed. It's a special report, and we got into a lot of interesting details. We have a couple more questions from you, and then we're going to call it a night. By the way, if you're new here, go to darkjournalist.com, sign up for our newsletter. It's a free newsletter. Everything in there is going to let you know about the amazing things that we have coming up for you. It's all in that free newsletter, and it takes like 20 seconds to sign up. So make sure you're on that list. Stand up and be counted. Miss Olivia, you're up. 2 questions.
Shaska 108. Ben Fulford says that the sky is falling. Earth will blow up next week. Please remember to wear fashionable shoes. And Community Guidelines says Trump will be at the Super Bowl tomorrow. Will COG stage a, quote, alien attack or claim it was Iran?
Well, the Super Bowl thing is interesting. I hope that's a good game for everybody. I will say this, that Trump loves the sporting events. Some terrible messaging came out of the Trump administration that he left instructions to obliterate Iran if he was assassinated. Don't even say things of that nature, because it tempts the deep state to carry out, these absurd assassination plans, which they already have through Thomas Matthew Crooks, which, by the way, I've been doing more research on Crooks. This very, very, very strange things they were doing there with Crooks and with Rausch, and there are no answers for what they were doing with these people. And so when we talk about MK Ultra, that all came out, of the CIA and the FBI, and the COINTELPRO came directly out of the FBI, and the MK Ultra experiments out of the CIA. But this cross-pollination of these operations and how little known they are, they're just kind of whispers back there. We still don't know what they've done. But programming people like Crooks to kill Trump, as they did, And I think that assassination sequence, one of the most bizarre things I've ever seen in history. But you have to say that Trump should never take the bait if his CIA people are like, oh, Iran's trying to get you. I don't think Iran is stupid and wants to assassinate President Trump. I really don't. You know, and that reminds me of like the state actors. They always claim that state actors killed Kennedy. It doesn't wash. If you really, why would Khrushchev or Castro want to kill Kennedy or some other state? You know, sometimes you hear Israel and stuff. What happens is you have a foundation with the intelligence agencies. They're connected to, you know, international finance and things of this nature. But what's overlooked in the Kennedy case is the aerospace aspect, because without doing the aerospace aspect the way they wanted to do, that is control things on the ground from above, you know, using low Earth orbit satellites and weapons in space and all the rest of it. If Kennedy builds it out as like a scientific free-for-all and shares it with Russians and all the rest, you can't do it. So that's where history changes, because then we go from being this very idealistic society into something else. And I'll tell you, the thing that we moved into, which when Martin Luther King said, you know, America's become so arrogant. Well, that's when LBJ was president, not when Kennedy was president. And he was right, you know, because we moved from being this kind of light to the world in a sense. I mean, there were problems, but we moved into something else. And, you know, there were periods like the 80s, I think, where you also, we were able to pick up some of that. But it's come down. It's one of the reasons that there were so many disagreements about the election and all the rest of it, that if you didn't have something absolutely perfect in the Trump administration, don't go for it. No, you still have to go for your best possible option. And certainly that's something that we did in this election. But he has to be very careful about the hawks. And so all the hawks seem to be around the Middle East in this group. So the former group, the Biden administration, it was all about pressing Russia. This one wants Iran trouble, and it wants Middle Eastern trouble. So, you know, that's a very, very thorny subject, but he should not take the bait on that. All right, what else?
John Matthews, any speculation on what Elon will reveal during his 5 Super Bowl commercials tomorrow?
You know, my suggestion is take a day off from Elon Musk. And when you post something, if you go to post something about Musk, instead post your favorite song or your favorite piece of literature, your favorite quote or whatever. Part of this is a mind job with Musk. And, you know, if some things have happened that are good as a result of that mind job, fine. But, you know, let's move the consciousness into something else. But yeah, certainly if you're tracking Musk, there's a lot going on there. And it's understandable that many people would be tuning into that. But make a conscious effort in the next 24 hours not to speak about Elon Musk.
It ain't gonna happen.
Not to buy into any of his weird fights, not to like his tweets or anything like that. And, you know, listen to, what is it, Vivaldi or something. I have some very interesting things, and I feel bad because last episode I talked all about this apotheum effect that happened during the Betty and Barty Hill incident, and how when this photographer from the Boston Globe had this story that he went out there to take pictures of them, and he could not, like, the camera kept coming up with these blurred, weird images. And I recalled the story of how Edgar Casey, when he got a job as an X-ray tech, and all the X-ray got all screwed up around him. They turned into weird spirals and everything else because of the energy that danced off of Casey. Well, whatever took place with these people in that apotheum situation with Junior, which is the image that this is what Betty Hill sculpted after her meeting with Junior. there on that craft in New Hampshire in this amazing case. But I had to say the images themselves were so powerful that this photographer, couldn't develop, that I promised to show you these images. So there's the one kind of basic, contact sheet. There's a series of these, and he could not get the pictures clear, and all kinds of weird warped things would happen. But I'm going to show you some weird close-ups of these. And could you attribute it to, film leakage or whatever it happens to be? Sure. But keep in mind just how strange it is. Okay. That picture, if you can see, is actually, that's Barney Hill with Betty in the background. Now, we know that images can do weird things, but is that not strange? And that photographer's role only got stranger. I have a few more of these.
It's one thing if it happens in a single shot.
Yeah, it happened for the whole thing.
That's crazy.
It really is. And look at that. That's Betty Hill. I mean, it doesn't even look like a person.
It looks like a painting.
It does. Look at this. This is a picture of Betty Hill in front of a mirror. Okay, and the mirror, it looks like almost gets a UFO in the picture. I kid you not. This is just from their film strip. This hasn't been altered in any way. This is what they couldn't get a good picture of. Look at this. The face disappears and a UFO shows up in the mirror. I mean, this is some weird stuff. And I've seen weird stuff, but this, struck me as quite unusual. A little more from that, slightly closer. This is Betty Hill, who, it's very defined features and things. Like, for the camera to screw up on that level. And also, I mean, does it not look like a craft in the mirror?
Totally. It's apothium art. It just occurred
to me. It is
to me.
apothium art, yes. Whatever is happening there, I don't know, but I think there was, is that pretty much it? Oh, I have one last close-up. Look, yeah, I mean, just... What do you know?
You know what? It really gives you a spooky feeling.
My God, yeah, it is. It's like a horror show, but it's very, very. I get a very strange feeling with it.
It's unsettling.
Yeah, it is. And I've seen all kinds of weird double exposures and things, and I have enough experience with photography to be like, this would happen, that would happen. This, I can't explain what would cause this, except for apothium. I mean, how do you get that? You can almost see that Barney Hill looks normal. Mm-hmm. I mean, he looks a little out of it for a photo, but he's at least you can see his face. I don't know what on earth happened to Betty Hill there. So obviously their experience, I guess the point is their experience dragged around with them in other ways. And we know that because the compass, whenever they had spots on the car when they came back, and the compass would always spin. There were these 3 metal spots, something like 3 metal fingerprints on that car. And so for me, with their missing time and everything else, they're sucked into this whole apothium thing. And the FBI, the CIA X-Protect group, and the Air Force, they all get a hold of them, and they're trying to get a handle on this apothium effect that they've gone through. Everyone, you're watching the Dark Journalist Show. Whew, incredible FBI and the UFO files secret revealed. We'll take one more question.
Well, on that note, Kyle the White says, where can I see these photos online? Can you either post them to X or even send them out in a newsletter so people can take a look and blow them up?
Yeah, I'll post them. They're not easy to find. I didn't find them in normal online places. There's actually there's a story on that, but the actual strip, maybe somebody might have them. You could look for them, but I'll put these up online, and maybe we can get a discussion going about them. I think it's worthwhile because I believe this apothium effect works anywhere that we have any kind of technology operating. It changes things, and I think that that's crucial for us. Tends to imitate a kind of almost like a saintly appearance, right? or at least something of that nature. I wanted to finish this off by saying, in this Torbit document book, which is like WikiLeaks of 1970, but it goes through this organization called DISC, which is Defense Industrial Security Command, that was headed up by von Braun, a secret organization to protect the UFO file. And they put as the head of the group this division of the FBI. So it's one of the few things on the record that was pointing to the FBI around the UFO file. So in my opinion, there could be a lot to be worked out from that. So I'm going to go over in a follow-up episode a lot of what they have to say about it, and to show you something I found in relation to how Defense Industrial Security Command could have matured over the years, shall we say. By the way, some of the people involved, according to the Torbit document, in DISC were people like Bannister and Ruby and others, and Roy Cohn. So I'll just give you a little teaser for this. The Security Division of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA, headed by Werner von Braun, head of the German Nazi rocket program from 32 to 45. And Dornberger is his boss, of course, for these slave labor in Peenemünde to build the V-2 rockets. Headquarters for this group was the Defense Industrial Security Command. It's interesting, he uses all caps there. This guy's a lawyer. Seems like a very specific. And he said, originally it was at Muscle Shoals Redstone Arsenal in Alabama, and also on East Broad Street in Columbus, Ohio. Defense Industrial Security Command is the police and espionage agency for the U.S. munitions makers. DISC was organized by J. Edgar Hoover. William Sullivan, his chief assistant, that's the guy that I highlighted last week who got shot just before giving his testimony in 1977 because he was mistaken for a deer. Well, she later examined the involvement of a large number of the DISC agents, including Clay Shaw, Guy Bannister, Jack Ruby, and Lee Harvey Oswald and David Ferry, with Perman Dix's Louis Mortimer Bloomfield of Montreal, Canada, in charge. That's an explosive piece just hanging out back there that I think people, it's hard to unearth what's going on in the Torbit document, but it's so advanced, and it's got aerospace in the heart of the setup and the personnel around the Kennedy assassination. And it's so far ahead of its time, but it goes through point by point the Garrison case. It focuses heavily on the case, which was current at that point when they were doing these leaks. And so this thing was like a 1970 WikiLeaks. I guess that's the way to look at it. I guess the upshot with this is that the FBI's role around the UFO file has been shrouded very, very heavily. And yet, let us take a moment to realize that this week, Ryan Graves, who is one of these, pilots who saw UFOs that the TTSA put out there, and now he's Citizens for Safe Aerospace or something like that. But I do believe this, that I think he has those contacts, and I think that his story got verified. And I think that those FBI agents who were on JSEX were also on this working UFO file group in the FBI. That's a breakthrough. And I think you're going to see that really opening some things up here, especially if you get a Kash Patel in charge. And with that, Miss Olivia, you're up.
Okay, Rotten Crypto Bits. So what is next for disclosure? And Food Provider, don't you think that disclosure, at least of 0 point energy, is part and parcel of openly going to Mars?
Yeah, free energy, 0 point energy, but the X technology is at the heart of these things. So, there's a lot of things in relation to the advanced technology, its exotic nature. And then when you get around the apotheum effect in the X technology, both in this mystery school tie-over kind of Tesla version of it, and in the UFO file version of it, that things, when they've tried to, let's say, aim that apotheum effect, sometimes it's had a boomerang effect. Let's say it's hard to predict, kind of like the Philadelphia experiment didn't do what they wanted it to do. It's at a level, I would say, where they know and they have an advantage with it. They know what it can do. And there is probably a fear there that since it has a reality distortion effect, that they could lose control. And so I think these things need to be kept in mind if we understand them, see through them to the fears that they're operating with in the background. And with that, Miss Olivia, I guess that's our last question of the night.
That's great, but I would just want to mention, Fooper Fighter just gave a shout out to Sergio Mendes and Brazil 66, which is such a great album.
Oh,
And,
wow,
you
yeah.
know, when you were talking about listening to wonderful music.
Oh, yeah,
and,
yeah.
You know,
That's a great idea.
ourselves with great art.
Yes.
You know, like long form, like a wonderful classic movie, a foreign film. You know, let's, you know, I think we all have to challenge ourselves from, you know, this short little bursts of anger and resentment that you get on X and things like that, and just, you know, break away and watch something that actually enriches your soul. That, you know, it's so healing and therapeutic.
Oh, yeah. How does real information come to you anyway? What state is it that you're in? You know, Emerson said that he had to be among trees in order to be in that he could write. And I think that things will occur to you, you know, but I think it should be, you know, when you're on the hunt on these subjects, you should be looking for the most potent stuff and the least entertainment-oriented stuff. And I think one of the dangers with X, as much as it's great as an open forum, is it's bred a kind of naivete about the people who are behind it. So let's be aware as we go there and not do a Brett Weinstein and be like, hey, Elon's going to take care of the UFO file too, even though he won't talk about any of it. So, you know, it's very important to understand that the world and the universe is a big, big place with all kinds of possibilities, and there's all kinds of mystery attached to it. So what we're doing is we're finding our way through the mystery and in things like the mystery schools. And there's a real track record there of people like Steiner, Casey. And when you come just on a researcher level, there's a real track record there of incredible people as well. So we have this road kind of ahead of us that we can do it the right way and, you know, try to resist the brainwashing as we get along. And I think on the UFO file, that'll end up being worth it. As a matter of fact, when you're in a sane state, if you really look at people like Lou or, you know, these other counterintelligence people with the egg-loving guy and all that guy, you know, you can really see through them. It's amazing. It's very, very interesting.
Right, your discernment.
Oh, yeah.
Is there.
Yes. And, you know, I often say this, which is it's not to be judgmental. It's kind of like you have to be able to discern, and you must be able to discern things without judging them. So dark journalism, any kind of investigative journalism, is adversarial journalism. And it's not personal. It can't be, or you get out of the business. But it is adversarial, because if people are up to no good, your job as a journalist is to get to the bottom of what they're doing and to ask them tough questions. And these softball sessions with these people who are bringing forward extraordinary claims with no evidence and are, you know, being aggressive with other people and are, you know, clearly linked to an intelligence arm that funds their activities. You know, I don't think that there should be any pulling of punches with people like that. And I certainly haven't. But I've also tried to be as much of a gentleman about it as I could. And all of those people, including Mellon and all those people, were always welcome to come on this show and have a gentleman's debate. But darn it, they never took my offer on that. The only one who did talk to me in the background was Grush, to his credit. And he Chris Mellon scared him off. So it's weird because Grush, oddly enough, Grush, I think, had more of an inclination towards honesty than all of these guys, So it's funny how if you get around the wrong crowd, things go south for you. And with that, Miss Olivia, I think that's the end of our show.
Okay. All right. Let me line this up. I would like to thank Jer Ryan, Occult Fan, Norman Lee Smith Music, Eurythmia's Fun, Empire of Light, Descat Brock, Fulcanelli, Wolfgang McCarthy, H. Ann, Black Tie, The Bikini Truther, Ray Story, Moses, Chelling the Heart Barbara Joyce, Seeing Sights, The Polypharmacist, Jonathan McIntosh, Mac Hike 57, Brian Whitaker, Debbie McAdoo, Erica Swenson Elliott, Kevin Bauman, Joseph Fabry, Thomas Ball, John Matthews, Robert Scott, and World Astrology Report. Thank you so much for your generous super chats.
Wow, incredible. We really appreciate your support. And to all our subscribers, thank you. It makes a great deal of difference. We're going to be back with you next week with a very exciting episode. And just watch what the incredible things we have coming up for you. Make sure that you're plugged in to the show. And I was going to do some shout outs here on the way out. I was just showing everybody the Age of Flying Saucers, Notes on a Projected History of Unidentified Flying Objects, Paris Flamand. Interesting, very interesting book, and not sensational at all, So it's a very interesting Keel, really intense, following every lead and all the rest of it, and Flamand, kind of reflective, philosophical. They both gave us quite a bit. Darcy Edmonds, it's great to see you out there. Thank you, Darcy. Tina Boric. Hey, Tina, keep your vibration high. Indeed. Fern Folks, Kevin Bauman, David Allen. Thanks for having a show this week. Yes, absolutely. I wouldn't miss it. I had a little bit of a cold, I guess you could say, but wasn't anything to write home about. So here I am. Scarlet Fire. I love you all. Isn't that nice? We love you too, Scarlet. Thomas Ball. DJ's emerging as a superstar.
Right on.
Yeah. I like that. He's got the right idea. Stay warm. Najat. Thanks you. It's great to see you out there. El Kiter. Whoo-wee. Esther Taylor, Corey Anderson. Mary Pavich. Free Wheezy. Free Wheezy, I think I've seen you on Twitter making some very interesting comments, unless I'm mistaken, but yeah. It's great to see you out there. Thank you, DJ and Olivia. Good night, everyone. Stay warm. Kat Goida. Hey, Kat. Vintage Moody Blues, Frank Sinatra or Bon Jovi. There's a range. Let's see. Brilliant show. Chat, may we all be safe and meet again next week. Oh, yes, we will. We certainly will. DJ is hardcore, says Bardo. I appreciate it. I want the information to be potent for you guys. I see so much cotton candy, Intel cotton candy floating around. It's really interesting. Night Gazer. DJ and Olivia rule the weekend. Excellent. I like that. Congratulations, Olivia. Nicely done. Kat Gordick. John Candy movie. She gets another one. Great mind wash. Excellent choice.
Comedy is so important right now.
It is. Jessica Rodriguez. Definitely a rewatch episode. Thank you, Jessica. Hang in there during the storm. What else we got? Roger. I know Kate's out there. It's great to see you. Buff Ready. Moments Divine. DJ Olivia, great show. Debbie McAdoo gets the last word. Thank you, everyone. And it says end broadcast, but
never really ends.
It never really ends. And never let it be forgot. Once there was a Camelot, and it could be again. Let's see Bobby get in there as HHS. Wouldn't this will be something. If the confirmation happens, we'll watch out. We'll love you, everyone, and have a great weekend. We'll see you all next week.
God bless everybody.
Have a great night.